We're live. Hi, Lee.
Yay. Hey, Ethan.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, friend.
And hi, friends. Welcome, friends new and old and maybe not old. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm going to put a little check-in question in the chat. Let's do something like, what are you most disappointed by in your life? No, I'm playing. What, let's do this. Let's just get some positivity flowing. What's great about your life today? And I'm going to put you on the spot today,
Yeah.
and just give me, as folks are finding their seats, virtual seats, what's great about your life today?
Let's see. What's great about my life today? I woke up this morning. I got to talk to some amazing students pretty much all day, and that's always a treat. I love my community, and I live in this quiet little neighborhood in Philly, and I like my neighbors, and I got to wave to my neighbors today after work. So that was cute and fun and nice. So there's a lot good about today.
Oh my gosh, I love all that. I love all that. I was
Yeah.
expecting one thing and you gave me so much more. And
Oh,
yeah, feel
yay.
free to share in the chat. No, you're good. Feel free to share in the chat what's great about your life. What's great about my life today? A lot. I was sharing with you some of it. I get
Mhm.
to like hang out with my daughter in a little bit. We're gonna, not that I don't do that every day, but we're gonna play Pokemon Unite, which is like really specific. She's 7, and tomorrow we're gonna go see Hamilton. I'm real excited. Yeah, I know.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and I've seen it already in the
Yeah.
theater, but we had
Mhm.
COVID. So another good thing is we recovered from COVID, so we're good now.
Good.
We're
Oh,
invincible
good.
for the next little while. So yeah, so that's great. And that she's like, this morning in the car, we're driving to school, and she's like, I was playing something else, and she's like, Hamilton. And I was like, okay. So, well, welcome, friends. Bob says 60 degrees in February,
How
right?
fun.
Yeah, Marianne, this is the awesome Mother's Day. Yeah, folks checking in with weather. So feel free to share at any point what's great about your life. I'm curious to hear. And we've got, look at this, 85% parents on this. That's I've never done a webinar where we had 85% parents joining, and
Wow.
9% counselors and 4% students. Cool.
Hmm.
Well, hi and welcome. And I'm gonna do like a couple quick announcements and then kick it over to you, Alicia, for all the things. So first of all, happy Black History Month, everyone. A quote, there's a quote that I really love from Obama. I'm gonna put it in the chat here and I'm gonna read it to y'all. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Yes.
Yes.
If folks are interested in issues of access and equity, there's a great resource that the Center for Racial Justice put out, and this is a resource for counselors, but I think it's also really cool for parents to see it. This is just like a whole bunch of awesome resources. I'm gonna put in the chat. It's a guide for educators, and I mean it's for educators, but it's also for families, and it's just got a whole bunch of stuff. I'm gonna actually share my screen real quick so y'all can see what I'm talking about, because like 5% of you will click on it. But look, there's everything from how do we celebrate Black History Month, teaching it in schools. Do we need Black History Month? Underrepresentation and miseducation of Black stories, experiences, and histories in school. What are ways to bring Black Lives Matter into the classroom, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch here. And yeah, anyway, and if we've also got a webinar that I'll share a link to from last year, but this is more for counselors, and we'll follow up with a resource on that. If you're interested in like what's going on at College Essay Guy, we have a new events page, and I'll paste this link as well. And it's got webinars like the one I just mentioned, but a whole bunch of other stuff, because we've always got a lot of stuff going on. So basically this webinar, we've been doing a couple more of these. We've done a couple more of these recently. There was like this is for counselors, essay editing mini course. There's 15 ways to level up your essays right now. Not something that students need to be thinking about in February, but this is from last November. Yeah, so anyway, tons and tons of stuff. There's stuff on personal statements. There's stuff on financial aid, all kinds of things. Speaking of financial aid, we've got a mini course coming up, not this Saturday, but next Saturday. And it's a mini course basically on how to understand college affordability. And it's with Amanda Miller, who is an awesome expert who has tons to say. And so we put together this course. It's a 3-hour extravaganza, and you can get the recording and watch it later if you want. But it's Saturday, the 26th, 11 o'clock my time, 2 p.m. Alicia's time on the East Coast. And it's pay what you can, as all of our courses are. So there's no barrier to entry. There's like a suggested cost, but really pay whatever you want. And we're going to walk through everything about like the FAFSA is changing this year. That's the free application for federal student aid. What are some common mistakes that students make when they're thinking about financial aid? There's a step-by-step guide to building a college list based on your, financial needs. And I was going to say preferences, but it's not always a preference. And then what do you do when the amount offered by a college isn't enough to make it affordable? Some of y'all may be in that right now. Say you've got a senior and you're looking at like, hey, we can't afford the price that we've been offered. So what can you do about that? So, Alicia, you may be talking about that a little bit today, but Amanda's going to do kind of a deep dive on that. And that's weekend after next. We'll follow up with links on all that. Those are the announcements. Those are the commercials. I used to do in high school, I used to do the morning announcements, and I feel like I was just not doing the morning announcements. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our distinguished guest, Alicia Oglesby. And Alicia, I'm going to let you intro yourself.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm a fan of morning announcements. I like being informed in the morning. So that's great. Yeah. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining. My name is Alicia Oglesby. I am a high school counselor. And so I've been a high school counselor, a college counselor, a director of college counseling, all of those wonderful titles for about the last 9 years. And so I've spent years and years working with high school students on their college applications, on their high school experience. And so I'm really excited to be here. I'm generally always excited to talk to families and students about this process because I think it can be confusing and overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And so I really hope that tonight or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, you'll get to get some additional insights into how I view the process and how I approach the process with my students and how that has sort of evolved over the years. And I hope that I can just share some valuable information that you can take what you need and apply it to your family and your student's situation.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to give y'all a sense of like, what are the bullets we're covering? This was in the email, but we're going to start with talking about what is the purpose of the college application process. Then we're going to talk about where do you start if you feel like you don't know where to start. We'll talk about researching colleges and in fact, maybe even researching colleges you've never heard of and finding that diamond in the rough that was like, oh, I didn't even know that could be a place for me. That's how I found my college. I hadn't heard of mine before I got there. What role parents can, that's my phone. I'm gonna turn that off. That's the reminder to turn off your phones is what that is. What role parents can play in this process. Why you start to depersonalize the process. I'm gonna let Alicia talk more about that. And then how do you find joy from now until May 1st, 2023? And that's if you're a junior, if you're 11th grader, a parent of an 11th grader, and you're looking ahead to this process, that's going to be the time. That's decision day when you put down you click the box, you do the signature form, you put in your deposit. That's deposit day. And then we're going to have lots of time for Q&A. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat. And Ashley, not Alicia, Ashley, who's also on the call, is standing by. She will be putting them onto a Google Doc behind the scenes for us. So without further ado, Alicia, talk to us about what is the purpose of this process? Why? What's up with this? Like, give us the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually think that the big idea behind the college application process is really good. I think that it serves a purpose for colleges and universities in a way that is really, really well intentioned. And so it doesn't necessarily feel like that sometimes on the other end when students and families are stressed out about the parts of the application and the deadlines of the application and all of this. But ultimately, the purpose of this process is really to build, in my opinion, it's really to build that freshman class. And so colleges and universities have goals, they have visions, they have a mission, they have programs, they have, sports teams and bands, and they have all of these parts that make up their college and their university. And essentially, they're wanting to bring people on campus who can live out that mission, live out those values, live out that vision for the college or for the university. And so the college application process is really a way for them to figure out who's going to be on our campus next year, who do we need here, who do we want here, who would be a great fit for the ideas that we have for the direction of this college or university. And so I think that sometimes that gets lost, and we get so bogged down with the minutia of it, with the GPA averages and the SAT averages and all of these sorts of things, that we lose sight of colleges and universities really wanting to create a community, essentially. And so, I'll talk a little bit about depersonalizing the process a little bit later, but this is certainly in a complex way a part of that. And I think, building that freshman class is on the one end, and on the other end, students are really communicating through this process who they are to a degree, right? And so it's very limited in a way, right, where we're condensing this information down to really the last 3 years of your high school experience. We're really only getting 9th, 10th, and 11th, a little window into 12th, but we might not be getting those grades just yet. 3 years of activity, a couple teachers, right, out of all of the teachers that you've had in your high school experience. Some colleges and universities have switched things up and invited a letter from a friend or a recommendation from a relative and things like that. But ultimately, students are getting the opportunity to share a bit about themselves in a way that will help that university or college make that decision.
Yeah. And I want to click on this for just a minute. It seems like, I'm going to kind of ask you a leading question because I think we're kind of aligned on this, but it seems like ostensibly it's about applying to college, but really there are these like kind of unexpected opportunities sort of baked into the process for students to learn a little bit more about themselves and, find some of that. Well, you talked a little bit more about some of those things that maybe parents and students aren't expecting as they go through this process, but like, what can this process, when it's at its best, be? And then we can talk about how we do that. But like, what is it? What are some of those unexpected opportunities?
Yeah, so certainly reflection. I think that's really a theme that I bring up with my students and families that is often unexpected. There is this focus on the future, right? And justifiably thinking about, this is where I want to be, this is where I want to go, this is what I have to show to get to this next place, when really there is an opportunity to reflect on what has been meaningful in your life over the past 3 or so years. So I think that reflection is often overlooked during this process, but it's so valuable and it's so important because it informs so much of the decisions, so many of the decisions that we make, and it really in ways that we may or may not be aware of. Right. And so, I'm often asking students to think about the past 3 years, what has worked in their high school experience, what hasn't really worked for them. Students will say things like, I want to go to a big school. I want to go to a big school where there's like people running around on game day and they've got their face painted and they're loud and they're, and I'm like, okay, well, that happened at homecoming. What did you think about that? Like, oh, I hate homecoming. Right.
Oh, right.
Exactly. So there is an opportunity to reflect. There's an opportunity to really turn inward. And, this is something that you and I have talked about before, turning inward and really exploring our values, exploring what makes us tick and what makes us feel fulfilled as a part of this process, as we're thinking about next steps and planning on, this next environment where students will be for maybe 4, 5, 6 years,
Right.
and how, how that experience will contribute to how we make this decision.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, there aren't too many in our culture like these rites of passage, and this feels like a modern rite of
Mm,
passage. And they've got this limited time, and you're going deep, and you're asking big questions like, who have I been? What do I care about? And so
mhm.
those things, my hope for students is always like, I hope you learn a whole lot about yourself, no matter where you get in.
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's talk to them about where to start when if students, or let's say, parents, where do parents point students to start when they're thinking about this college process?
Yeah, so I think parents would really be a helpful guide in this process if they are asking students, their children, their young adults to reflect and spend some time thinking about what has worked for them, to really personalize this process in a way where, right now at this time of the year, a lot of 11th graders are building out their college wish lists, the places where they might want to attend. And so for parents to ask their student to take a step back and really think about, okay, what is it about this particular institution that is appealing to you? What draws you in to this particular place? The why behind it. I think that's helpful to some students. I also think that it's parents often can play a really great role in simply getting organized. We have probably had experience by now creating spreadsheets, maybe, um, organizing our bills, right? So we have some of these skills that our students are still learning. Organization around this process can be immensely helpful because there are so many moving parts, and because those moving parts can change within 6 months. And hopefully by now they won't, but some might, right? And so, I'm often telling parents, create that spreadsheet. I have some parents who just live by spreadsheets. Do it again. Make a list of those colleges, add columns for the important information that you need to keep track of. Help your student figure out like which emails to open, which emails to close. Like these are ways in which I think parents can be most helpful in a way that still allows the student to maintain some sense of autonomy in
Mhm.
this process. It's kind of, I often give the analogy of the bowling alley for the babies when they put up the little
Yeah, so they
on
don't
the
go in the
side.
gutter ball every time, right?
Exactly, right? Like we don't want gutter balls. So we're here to put up some parameters to help keep you somewhat centered, as teenagers can be during this time. It's tricky.
Mhm.
But I think that organization pieces can be really helpful. Checklists, to-do lists, collaborating on those timelines. Parents keep a calendar and say, hey, circle a date. Like this is the date we're going to visit X campus. So just make sure you get your questions ready for our visit. Things like that.
Yeah.
I think is those are good ways to start the process so that it doesn't feel quite as out of control.
Yeah, I want to share a couple resources that, in case we're asking folks, in case folks think we're asking them to go do this all on their own. Here's,
No.
Alicia mentioned choosing a college and starting to think about that. We've got this guide. I put the link in the chat to choosing a college. And what this is it's got, some different steps. How do you get to know your interests and preferences? Figuring out what qualities you're looking for. There's like some worksheets that are free to download that, students can start to figure out exactly what they're looking for. And then as you scroll down, there's a little link down here that's got a little college list research tracker. And for those of you who do like spreadsheets, here's one that you can use that's got specifics on, how you can basically fill in those. And I want to talk to you a second about what your advice you give on list building. But, those wild card schools, the reach schools, maybe likely schools, And then, you can track here what counselors think, what students like, what's it going to cost, average GPA. So you spreadsheet to your heart's content. And then another one is we've got this college application and admissions timeline, which like walks you through all the things. And then if you are the kind of parent who likes spreadsheets and you're down to do it, you can click here. So you don't have to create your own. And it's got all the schools, the type of application, what do they require, and you can kind of fill that in as you go. So just some resources, some more resources to supplement this.
Absolutely.
What advice do you give on list building when students are, because now is not a bad time to be thinking about that. What do you tell students and parents?
Yeah, so first and foremost, hopefully every single college on a student's list is a school where that student could potentially see themselves, right? We're not just throwing schools on a list because we've heard of them. Hopefully we're able to do some research into these schools and really connect it to who the student is and what the student wants. Or at least an idea of what the student wants. And so when building out a list, over the past 10 years, this hasn't really changed. I often hear students say, these are the schools that they've chosen because they've heard of them, right? So they choose the schools that they're familiar with. And one of the first questions I ask is, are you open to researching schools that you have not heard of? When they say yes, because they usually do, I'm ecstatic, right? Because as a high school counselor, as a college counselor, as people who are in this field, right? You and I know of so many institutions, so many hidden gems, so many schools where over the years I've asked students to research and they come back and say, how did you know I would like this place? Never heard of it. Had no interest in going to Ohio or Maryland or Kentucky, right? But yeah, this school is amazing. They have everything that I want. And so keeping an open mind is incredibly important. I think that, tons of students go to the college where they can afford to go, and that's reasonable, that's justifiable, that's totally expected. It's a smart decision for a lot of students, for a lot of families. For families and students who can, think outside the box, who can travel away from home, who have those options, to keep an open mind, to talk to your school counselor. I'm a little biased in that, of course. If you have a high school counselor, if you have a college counselor at your high school, talk to them. They are aware of the institutions where the students from your school apply, where they are admitted, what types of financial aid packages they get, right? And so we keep track of that information, and so we can share that with students to help build out that list. So I think keeping an open mind, really, to there are over 2,000 four-year institutions in the country, and so if the United States is your oyster, then you have so many options. So keep an open mind. And so I would also suggest, the research is important, visiting the website, thoroughly looking for the answers that you need. And when you are not able to find those answers on the website, through the information sessions, signing up for webinars, meeting with those schools if they visit your high school, attending college fairs if you're able to attend college fairs, and have your list of questions ready. I've done my research. I wasn't able to find out if you have this AI institute, if it's going to be running next year, and do students have to apply for this, and these sorts of questions. So making it personal in that way, I think is also important in narrowing down that list. But think beyond the schools that and trust that there are multiple institutions where you can go and be really happy and thrive and do your best work.
Yes, you're speaking my language right now. I want to share one more resource from the one that I just shared, in case y'all don't notice this link. If you click, Alicia talked about researching. If you click this link right here, it's going to open up a PDF that's called How to Create a Great College List. And this is based on a podcast that I recorded with Stephen Antonoff, who's going to be leading a mini course with me in April, which we haven't announced yet. But if you're trying to figure out more about what are those things you're looking for, you'll see on this list here, if you're interested in studying, for example, biology, and you click on the biology link there, it'll take you to College Express and give you a list of colleges with great biology programs. And so, yes, you'll have heard of these, Brown and Caltech and Columbia and Emory, but maybe the student doesn't know as much about Grinnell or Kalamazoo, right? Some of these others that are kind of like beloved. Like I love Kalamazoo.
I love Kalamazoo.
Yeah, there were a couple first-gen kids that I worked with at a charter school that ended up getting full rides to Kalamazoo, and I've got a soft spot in my heart. So anyway, the point here is that this resource, no matter what you're looking for, and you can also, there are more lists here. I'm going to make this a little bit larger, where you've got, colleges with the most international students or the best cooperative education, like co-op programs, or, colleges to consider for online learning. So just anything that you're kind of looking for. This is just an example of some of these lists you'll find on College Express. And this is just sort of like a big example of those. It kind of walks you through that. So that's some more stuff on researching. I'm curious, what do you feel like in terms of the relationship between parents and students through this process? Because it can be complicated. Like which stuff is squarely in like, okay, parents deal with this, students need to be dealing with this. And then what's in the Venn diagram of like stuff that can be useful and maybe even fun to do together?
Yeah. So students need to fill out their own application. And it's to some that might seem obvious, but it's not necessarily, because it's an electronic form typically that parents and adults could probably do very quickly, because we're accustomed to that type of information and entering that type of information often. Right. But yeah, students, the registration for Common App needs to be to your student email. And students' information needs to be completed by the student. The student needs to write their own essay. Certainly maybe sit together and read it. If the student wants to read it aloud to their parent, they can sit together and, do that and see, get some feedback on it. I think that's perfectly fine for a little bit of overlap. I think parents do a great job of arranging visits, in terms of logistics and, notifying the school that the student needs an excused absence, like that kind of those logistical details are great for parents to do. Potentially, certainly overlap with the spreadsheets, entering the information, looking up and entering information simultaneously, helping each other to fill in those blank spots. Parents suggesting tips for organization, helping with organization for sure. Students need to be talking primarily to their school counselor. That is something that is, for many students, it's fairly easy, depending on how many students are in your school and what that access looks like to your school counselor. For my school, students can just stop by my office to ask me a quick question. It takes a little bit more effort for me to loop in parents, because sometimes they're working during the day or working in the afternoon, and we have to coordinate schedules to be on the phone and all of this. So a quick question from a student to a counselor is the easiest way for students to keep track of that. Communicating with colleges and universities, students really need to be in charge of. Students really need to be, taking the lead on asking those questions of colleges and universities, even during the tour. I often have conversations with college admissions counselors who say, who can remember the times when students were asking lots of great questions and interesting questions, and the times when parents were doing most of the talking, right? So that makes a difference as well. So I think those are probably some of the main pieces, right? Students need to let counselors know that they changed their entire college list in September. It happens.
Sooner rather than later, hopefully.
Sooner rather than later. But if it happens, like, students need to be communicating that information for sure.
And is there a way that parents like can situate themselves, like how should they think about this? Because I know that there's like the extreme of like, you know what, I'm going to be hands off and let so and so handle it, and then you've got parents who want to be just real involved and like, hey, and they're the ones emailing you and everything. Is there some kind of like, how would you like, and maybe thinking about just like past parents, but like, is there a metaphor that you use or like an analogy that would just help parents think about, okay, how should I situate myself in this process? Like, who am I? What is my role in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. Parents, you are in the passenger seat of the car. And I think that is probably one of the most useful analogies because so many students are potentially learning how to drive right now. And, you know, if it's not the passenger seat in the car, then it's, you know, behind the student getting on the bus, letting them put in their own money, letting them find the seat where they want to sit, and kind of just making sure that things are cool, making sure that things are moving along the way that they might need to be. But yeah, ultimately, you know, if you've ever been in the car with a teen who is driving, you're giving that, you're not trying to, you know, send out you're not screaming, right? Because we're both in a situation where we want to be safe and we want to be okay. Um, but sometimes there are some guidelines and some parameters that parents need to help set up. And that's perfectly understandable. You know, I have a lot of parents in the beginning of the process who aren't sure about how to talk to their students about money. But they know, right? We can't afford for you to go to a certain institution out of state, or we, you know, this is how much money we have saved for you, or we don't have any money at all saved, right? And so making sure that some of those parameters, some of that shared understanding is present is really important. And so I think parents can think about it like, you know, it's if they've been raising their child since birth, watching them walk, watching them put on their shoes and tie their shoes. You want to do it because you've got 5 minutes to get out the door. And
Right.
I'm standing here watching you struggle with these laces, right? But you know that they have to learn to tie their shoes. And so it's like that. It's like doing that all over again, really.
Yeah. Talk to me about, what does it mean to depersonalize the process? Why is that useful?
Yeah, I think it's useful because in a lot of ways it's not personal. I mean, the students are putting themselves in a vulnerable position. They're sharing parts of themselves through this essay and through this explanation of their activities, and they're explaining their family situation. So all of that is absolutely personal. But again, it's a small piece of the student's life, a small piece of what the student has experienced over 16 to 17 years. And so there's no way for colleges and universities to really know every single thing that they might need or want to know about a student.
Yeah.
And ultimately, their job is to create this freshman class. And so, you know, there are so many times, you know, I review and read for a fairly selective scholarship, national scholarship. And so, I mean, the applications that we get are marvelous, marvelous, right? But we have 7 kids or 17 kids out of hundreds of incredible children that we have to select. And so in that regard, it's not personal. If colleges and universities could admit all of the students that they want, if they had unlimited residence halls everywhere, they would probably admit so many more students, but they can't. And so when students get those, you know, deferral letters, those denial letters, those waitlist letters, it's not personal. Your application could have been, you know, just incredible.
Right.
But for whatever purposes that particular institution, you know, the reasons and the justification that they had to say, not this year or not this time, that could be related to so many things that we just don't have control over.
Right. A good example of that was in terms of like, we call these institutional priorities in the college admissions world, right?
Yes.
So an example of this was there was a selective school that was had a parking issue, and they didn't have enough parking spots. for the students. And so they were like, all right, what could we do? And they were like, you know what? Let's admit more international students this year because international students don't have
They're
cars.
not going to bring car. Yep.
And so they decided that year, we're going to open international enrollment because that's going to help us with our parking issue. And then guess what happened when those international students arrived in the US?
Did they buy cars?
They bought cars. And they have this parking issue. So, but I say that to say, like, just to support this point that you're making, is that it's not personal. It might be they have a parking issue. And they're like, therefore, this year, this is going to change. And this is the thing that, like, I think sometimes frustrates students and parents is you can't know what those are going to be.
Exactly.
Like, there's no like Google Doc where like, you know, Loyola Marymount University is like, here are our institutional priorities this year. And that's how this is in fact infecting enrollment. Wow. Enrollment. And so the thing that, you know, we say to students is like, focus on what you can control.
Yes.
Right. And not sort of like, well, what is this? Speaking of, and this is, I don't know if this lands in what you can control or not, but Mary, one of the parents asked this question, what suggestion would you give to parents whose kids want to sit in the back seat?
Oh, yeah.
Thoughts?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Lots of thoughts. So I think, and, you know, I'm a counselor at heart. And so I'm looking for underlying reasons. And there could be a number. There could be a number of reasons. The student could potentially feel a little anxious about the possibilities after high school. Students could, know that their parents are highly capable and they have other things that they want to worry about. And so they trust that their parents are going to take the lead and just help out in ways that take over a little bit. There are also students who really are so overwhelmed by the process. They just kind of don't want to touch it. So there could be a number of factors that contribute to why a student wants to sit in the back seat. And I think it's, the college application process is so deadline driven, right? Like there are clear-cut deadlines that you must meet in order to get certain things, decisions, financial aid packages, scholarships, all of these sorts of things. And so that can, naturally increase a little bit of anxiety in people, especially when some of those deadlines are high stakes. And so I think that in one regard, it's important to know what your options are. So every year I work with students who are kind of hands-off, not really engaged in the process. And so just, really helping them understand what the process is, what the steps are, that, as a parent, you are there to support them, reinforcing that it is their responsibility, and that you're there to help. Maybe setting some guidelines about what exactly you're going to help with. Breaking it down to like, this is your to-do list and this is my to-do list. So these are the things that you need to work on when you're ready. Hopefully it will be soon, but if it's not, we still have backup plans, right? Colleges and universities, again, there are so many and so many types. There are schools that are designed for students who will at some point apply maybe in January or February of their senior year, right? Like there are places where students can still apply at this point in the school year of their senior year. And so even though, that might, shake up parents a ton, right? They might not want to wait that long. But whatever is behind the sort of, taking that step back, hopefully through a little bit of education, encourage them to meet with their school counselors. We have a great way of helping students get motivated, even if it's as simple as a checklist. Sometimes that can take some of the pressure off, some of the uncertainty out of the process. But I think just, in the back of your mind, knowing that you need a plan B, you might need a plan C in terms of rolling admission schools or open admission schools. Those are all possibilities. Everyone's journey does not necessarily need to look the same. And it's okay if your student's journey is very different from their older siblings or from your neighbors or from your cousins or from your own. It's important to be honest about who our kids are, right? And what they need. So I think continue to be gentle. The last thing I would suggest for parents, I mean, this is the last thing I'm going to say, but it's also the last thing you should do, is add stress and anxiety and frustration to the process. Even if that's how you feel as a parent, I would say figure out a way to manage that and get support around that and work on that. Because adding that to the equation will probably not get your student to move any faster.
Mhm. Yeah, there was an interesting conversation. I was having a conversation with somebody recently about this. And one of the things she said was, you know, it took asking what, in this case, her son wanted.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was a moment of like, oh, you didn't ask. And she was like, no, I didn't. I hadn't actually asked him what his goal was.
Yes.
I assumed that we had the same goal, but then when I
Right.
actually asked him, I found that he had a very
Yeah.
different goal. And it was
Yeah.
like, oh, so that's like a quick one, is like, if that conversation hasn't been had yet,
Yeah.
and I'm anticipating that, and I have this conversation with my 7-year-old in different ways of like, and I realize, and this is like, I'm thinking specifically about like her playing a sport recently, that I just had different assumptions. And then we have to have a different conversation about like, okay, here's what you are definitely going to do because
Right.
you're living in this house, right?
Yeah.
You're living in this roof. And then here are the things that you have options around. And so I
Exactly.
think identifying those and naming those, making those explicit, and being like, for example, with Zola, I'll give an example, is like, she's going to play a sport and
Yes.
she can pick which sport, but she's going to
Yes.
play it, and it's going to be a team sport. And she's like, but I want, and we're
Yes.
like, look, you have options, but it's within these three. So I think just
Oh,
making
absolutely.
it right, what are the options that they have? Because there might be, again, like these assumptions around what you're going to apply to whatever schools and et cetera. And just being really, and I know y'all know this, like Mary and everybody listening is like, yes, have those conversations. But sometimes there's a great book, by the way, I want to just ping
Yeah.
from Rick Clark and Brendan Barnard, the Truth About College Admission, a family guide to getting in and staying together. It's got a lot more about this particular issue, about like how to have the college conversations and when to have them. I'm going to throw it in to the chat here. Rick's been a guest. He's the director of admission at Georgia Tech. He's been a webinar guest the last couple of years, and actually is going to be a guest next month.
Great.
So
Yeah, he has such great advice.
Yeah. Let's talk about joy. Joy is not oft talked about thing in the college admission process. What is some advice for students and parents and counselors too? How do you find joy between now and that decision time for those folks who are ramping up, especially?
Yeah. So I think joy is possible. Joy is possible. I've seen it happen. I've seen students and families enjoy this process to an extent, right? It can be a tricky process that can at times feel frustrating or confusing. But overall, I have seen families experience joy and excitement during this process. It doesn't have to be this daunting process when you are prepared in a way that feels comfortable, when you are informed about, trying to understand what at least most of it means, not all of it. When your expectations are realistic about what is happening here for you and for your student, and when you're communicating with each other about this process. And so I think finding joy is really appreciating each moment for what it is. I think one thing we don't talk about enough in these conversations is that it is a privilege to go to college. It's a privilege. We are, I'm college educated. My parents are college educated. A lot of people in this country who want to go to college are not able to for many different reasons. So if you are able to, that's a gift, and it's something to appreciate and be mindful of, that experience that we get to have as seniors in high school, venturing off to a campus where we get to do some stuff for 4 years, and that includes going to classes a little bit. And so I think being excited about that experience alone, and working with your family to narrow down those options and to really think about how great it was to be in this discussion-based class or this project-based learning, and you really want to do more of that, and then going online and finding that this particular school has it, high five, like we found another one that has this program, right? Like really making those moments precious in a way. I've had students who, at my previous school, we had a driver's ed section of the school. So there was a lot around learning. It was a milestone for a lot of our students. And so for some students, they got their license right before their first college tour. So their parents let them drive to the campus or whatever. And they, were really excited about that. Or a student might have a relative on a particular campus. And so you get to visit family or talk to family, Zoom with a family member that you haven't seen in a while. And, Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg are in the, like, those are actually people that I know. Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg are in the back, like waving, and how's Kyler? How are things going? Or, a student that graduated from your high school years ago that you kept in touch with. Or so any of these moments, any of those things that can seem trivial, but can actually be exciting, can actually be something to celebrate. I think, it can, sometimes students have this impression that it's going to be a really tough time, but I think parents can play another really great role in that, in really helping their student take a step back, helping to celebrate. Like Common App does, this isn't until, for the class of 2023, this won't be until the fall or the winter, but Common App has the confetti, right? Like parents, go to the dollar store, buy some confetti, like, yeah, you got to sweep it up later. But like for that first app, let's get some real confetti. Or,
You're talking about submitting the application, not even getting it.
Right. I'm just talking about submitting, clicking that button, like you did this, like you filled out the thing, right? You got your final draft essay where you feel really proud of it. Like, what's your favorite food? We're going to make your favorite dinner. Like you finished your essay. It took you 4 or 5 months to finally get it where you wanted to get it. We're gonna bake you a vanilla cake, like whatever, like just really, because it goes by really quickly. And so, parents, I think that you have a great role in really celebrating those little wins throughout the process, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. There's a thing that you can do too that I want to say is like a practical thing. And I want to speak to students for a second, because 30%, a third of y'all are students who are on this right now. So one thing you can do, you can do this mental exercise where you fast forward to the moment. Let's say that it's like you've gotten all of your school acceptances back and it didn't work out the way you wanted it to. So you can kind of do this, and you can kind of do this on your own if you want. Y'all want to do this later, but like fast forward. Okay, here I am. I've gotten my acceptances. It didn't work out. How surprised are you? First question to ask. Scale of 1 to 10. Are you surprised, like 10 or 1? And then once you've done that, ask yourself, well, why didn't it turn out that way? What could I have done differently? Like, what are those things that I could control? And what that might do is it might point you to certain patches, right, or action things that you can do. One of the things, for example, that when students, like, imagine the worst case scenario was like, I didn't get in anywhere. Oftentimes the reason is that you didn't have enough likely schools on your list, right? Enough of those foundational schools. So what can you do about it? Well, you can start to like research and fall in love with some of those schools that you can get into. So then fast forward, and then, okay, let's say you've done that work. Now do the same mental exercise. Okay, now you've gotten into it didn't work out the way you'd hoped it would. Now how surprised are you? And once you get to like, level 8 or 9, surprised I didn't get into those schools. Okay, you've done the work. But hopefully before that points you to like work that you can do along the way.
Exactly.
What you might also find along the way is that there's some stuff that you can control and there's some stuff you can't control. Like if you don't get into Stanford, be level 1 surprised. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so, but I think be surprised if you don't get into any of your schools and you've done all that work to, you know what I'm saying? So like, there is stuff that you can like specifically, concretely do.
Yes.
The other thing I'm going to say, and I don't often say this because I'm super optimistic person, is like, you can kind of fast forward to and like feel into like the disappointment, because this process will probably come with disappointment, and you can actually fast forward and and actually imagine, okay, like feel into like what that feeling of disappointment is like. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but like I'll do this sometimes, and I'll just imagine myself in the scenario of like just feeling like, oh, and then I'll also imagine the opposite scenario of like celebrating. And you'd be surprised if you just do that, where that might take you. So these are kind of like, if it, as it were, guided meditations where you can just sort of guide yourself into these imaginings of like, what does it feel like to be really disappointed, 9 months from now? Or what does it feel like to be really celebratory? What went right? What did I do? And each one of those can, I think, lead you towards some specific things that are going to come from within. So Mary, who was saying like, I don't know if you want to clip this part and give it to, a student who you were, to your kid who you were talking about.
Yeah.
But these are like some simple mental exercises that you can do.
I love that.
I also want to share, you reminded me, Alicia, of a podcast episode, and I want to
great.
know that we've got a podcast. Sometimes people don't know that. We've got the College Essay Guy podcast with a different microphone and different sweater. Sometimes I'm wearing the same dang thing that I was wearing the last time. But you'll find the one that I want to call out is Maria Furtado, who worked at College Lives.
Yeah.
And if, as y'all are in the process of thinking about, well, what college would change my student's life that maybe I haven't heard of?
Yes.
We talked about the value of a liberal arts education, and there's so much awesomeness in here that I listened to Maria talk. I could listen to her for a long, long time, but it's a 45-minute episode. It's a real good one. If you're interested in some things like talking about essays, Park Muth spent 28 years working at University of Virginia. He's got a lot to say about what he learned reading 10,000 essays on episode 107. And then demonstrated interest. We're not going to even get into it today, but basically building a relationship with the college and letting them know, showing them the love, as it were. That's something that can be important. And I don't want to stress folks out with it. So I'm not going to talk about it fast, but this is a good one to check out too. If it's something that you're like, oh, how do I start to let colleges know that I'm really interested in them? Because for some schools, not all, but some schools, it can be important to start to, reach out to them, connect with them, whether that's through a virtual tour or whether that's through going to a college fair when they open those back up in person. So let's get to some questions. And folks, y'all feel free to, again, put them in the chat. Naziah asked, this is from before the session, or Nazia, what are the updates? What's changed in terms of COVID?
Yeah, a bunch, depending on the school. So yeah, guidelines in terms of what you need in order to be on campus. Some schools have made it mandatory to be vaccinated. Some schools say you can be on campus and not be vaccinated and not have a mask or anything. And so there's a range of some of those details. Some schools are offering more online courses now than they may have ever offered in the past. And so I think it's important to make sure you include that in your research. I had a conversation with a student about that today, who was concerned about some of those requirements and whether or not he should factor some of those decisions into whether or not he applies to those schools. Right. And considers going next year. So that has certainly been a more short-term change. A lot of colleges and universities have decided not to factor in the standardized testing that a lot of students take. And so recognizing that, at the beginning of the pandemic, many schools were shut down. We didn't have access to testing in the way that we traditionally had access to it. And so colleges and universities are still letting us know each week that they have decided to extend their test optional policies through another year. And so that is continuing to change. Some colleges and universities have been test optional or test free for over a decade. And so I think, again, that's going to be part of your research. Sometimes that makes the process a little bit more confusing in terms of students who are, testing fairly strongly or, are not really sure whether or not, how their scores will stack up. But it is definitely one of the more major changes that has happened. So those will be the two things that I would say are a pretty big deal for students and how they're crafting their lists or thinking about their future plans. you know, also, some colleges and universities are understaffed, for many different reasons. And
Right.
so that affects sometimes when decisions are going out, sometimes that affects decisions. And so, again, that's part of the process that of course we can't control, but it has changed over the past couple years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Relevant to what Alicia's talking about right now, we put together a list, a website, a page on our website with resources particular to, COVID-19, the changes. And if you scroll here, you'll see like there's a college admission status update tool from the National Association of College Admission Counseling, NACAC. You'll see just a whole list, a tool that basically gives like updates per campus. You'll see some stuff on researching colleges without visiting, if that's still impossible for you.
Yeah.
Lots of different virtual events. And then here's a big list of those test optional schools that Alicia is mentioning. There's another thing. Let's see, where is it here? Where is it? Oh, so I've got this guide to and if you Google COVID college essay guide, if you Google that, you'll see this post. There's a particular 250 word section in the Common App about writing about coronavirus. It's kind of funny. Well, now we're gonna have a bunch of people Googling COVID college. Yeah. So, it addresses things like, should you write about it in your personal statement? And the answer from me is no, because you've got this specific section to write about it. And then there's like, who should write about it, where to write about it, and then how. Like I walk through, and you can see this post is kind of long with specific examples. Like you can do a slightly creative one, or you can do a straightforward one. And that's linked on the same link that I just shared in the chat. The other thing that I want to ping for y'all is this college application hub, which has some of the things that we've talked about and a lot more. And I'll put this in the chat as well. If you're like overwhelmed by all the links, just take this one and bookmark this one, because this one has the stuff like how to develop a college list, which we talked about in the timeline. Those are the two things we posted first. The how to research colleges one that I just mentioned, and a whole bunch of more stuff. This one that I just mentioned. So this is all organized for you in one place. So this can be like a good go-to place for you as you're kind of thinking about what are some of these other things, including someone just asked the question, what do you do? How do you decide, how to pick a college? So that's covered in here. And there's all kinds of other stuff in here. So if you're trying to figure out how do I even pick a college, there's a guide to that on the hub that I just linked.
Nice.
Let's take a couple more.
Yeah.
Let's see. What's the difference between, that's pretty niche, but should you not apply to a college that the tuition is extremely high? Or should you, Eileen's asking, should I just allow my son to apply wherever he wants?
Yeah. So neither, kind of. So one, there's y'all are going to learn about, hopefully if y'all are able to tune in to the webinar in a couple weeks, you'll get to some more insider information about financing college education. But I think some fairly sage advice is to still include that in the research. So colleges have a sort of a sticker price that is their cost of attendance. So it's tuition, room and board, fees, they factor in some other things. If it's far away, you've got to fly to get there, or whatever the case might be. So factoring into really the cost of what it would be for your student to attend that school. But you also want to keep in mind that some schools offer merit aid scholarships. Some schools offer need-based scholarships. A lot of our families use the net price calculator, which is kind of an estimation of, what the financial aid package could potentially look like. It's usually not an exact match all the time. But I think it helps parents gauge whether or not a college is actually affordable. So, there are colleges and universities that cost $75,000 a year, but their college admissions counselors will tell you that most people do not pay anything close to that. And so I think that it's important to include finances in the process and to have an idea of what the family can afford. The government is going to tell you that you can afford probably a different number, but that's the FAFSA process that you'll encounter in the fall. But yeah, I think it's important to include that in the research, but to not get scared off necessarily by a huge sticker price.
Yeah. I was on a call today with Mark Salisbury from Tuition Fit.
Okay.
And he's got a really cool platform that he's put together. And
Oh,
I just
great.
feel like this, and it's like basically what you do. Actually, rather than share the screen, I'm just going to explain it to y'all.
Mhm.
It's essentially what Mark has collected is 15,000 actual award letters from campuses,
Great.
and it's in this database. So what you can do, and this is for like folks who like are getting award letters right now, is you can upload your award letter to the database, and then you get to see other award letters. So you put in your GPA and you put in your test scores if you have it, and your estimated family contribution, and you see other schools in that range and the money that they got offered
Mm.
from particular schools. So if you got offered X amount from Syracuse and you have this GPA, you can look at other award letters and be like, Syracuse, well, I noticed that last year offered, and I guess you could, say where you found out about it. But the point here is like to have more transparency in pricing and
Yes.
to just share some more of that information. So that's a cool
Yes.
resource to check out
Awesome.
as well. Let's do one more.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm trying to find one that will apply to a bunch of folks.
Okay.
Ba-dum-bum-bum. I'm just going back to our big list of questions.
Okay.
Um, how do we help? Okay, this is kind of a good big picture one.
Okay.
Tasha asks, and this is good for students, parents, counselors. How do we help students connect the education they're interested in now with a future field of
Mm.
employment to ensure job opportunities upon graduation?
Oh, yeah. So I love this. I love this idea because um, I often, and I know, Ethan, we've had this conversation before. I often ask parents and guardians and caregivers um, what they thought their career was going to be in high school.
I know where this is going. That's all
Maybe
you
if
need to
you,
say. That's all you need to say. Sorry, go
I mean,
ahead,
because
go
we can go into some great backstories, right? Maybe even, if parents, guardians attended college, what your major was when you started, whether or not that changed.
And how did that go for
Um,
you?
how
Yeah.
did that go? How did that work out?
Right.
Yeah, because I think, it's especially now when students have technology in ways that their parents did not. I mean, that technology alone has changed careers and occupations in so many different ways, so incredibly quickly, that I think sometimes it's really hard for us to even fathom the possibilities for students who are interested in a range of things. And so I think, this idea that it is typically linear is generally not the case. And so I think, it's wonderful. I love having conversations with students about connecting their interests and their strengths and their skills to things that they can do and explore in college.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of students, college is still very much an exploratory stage. Certainly, some students are in 10th grade. I know exactly what type of civil
Right.
engineer I want to be, and I'm applying to a direct admit program, and I know the math that I need to, right? Like,
And
okay,
and
great.
this answer is not for them.
This answer is not for those students.
Right.
So I think that there is really a lot to learn through that process of continuing to explore those strengths and skills in high school and in college. Trust that if that is your process, the career center on your college's campus is robust. Is that's going to be important, right? And knowing that colleges and universities are good at helping students figure that out. And I think it's important to trust that process, but also encourage your student to take advantage of those opportunities on campus, to take advantage of many different types of opportunities, internships, summer programs. Just keep learning until you figure it out, because when you figure it out, it's probably going to change, right? I can't even tell you the the subjects and career areas from 11th grade to now, right? Pretty different ideas about what I would be doing with my life. And to take a deep breath, because most people figure it out. And even if you don't, you still will probably be okay
You'll learn
in
some stuff.
some way, right? You'll
Yeah,
learn some stuff.
I mean, you're speaking to my life. I did not plan to be the college essay guy when I grew
Right.
up, but I
And look
studied,
at you now.
I
And
studied
look at you
theater
now, Ethan.
performance studies. I learned how to give and receive feedback.
Yep.
I learned how to study, and all, so
Yes.
in some ways it didn't matter what I was studying, but I was so grateful that my parents were like, go and do a thing that lights you up, because it
Yes.
kept me more engaged. I had an amazing time,
Yeah.
and I learned a ton of transferable skills, and I went to, kind of a
Exactly.
little art school. So
Right.
anyway, Alicia, thank you. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Thanks
Thank
for being
you.
here as ever. And thanks, y'all. If y'all have questions, you can reply. We're going to follow up with all the links via email, and you can, let us know all the things. I hope to see y'all on a future webinar. We've got, like we said, this Pay What You Can financial aid course coming up in a couple of weeks. Hope to see y'all there. So much love, and stay in touch. Bye.
Bye.